like imagine you're on a line coaching somebody or you're in a
Mhm.
private lesson and you know you're hoping to get somebody to like have a breakthrough with something that they're doing. Like what are you looking for? How are you diagnosing people?
So, I mean, it's going to be hard to lead into that directly. So I'll go kind of indirectly.
Yeah.
So, in addition to what I do with firearm stuff, I've had a pretty long career in corporate America. And the way that that career has kind of led me over time, it got into training aspects in a wide variety of topics. Um, from that into leadership development, things like that. So as I've learned, and I'm wired as an observer. I mean, that's what I do. I'm really, I have very little want or need for like recognition or my ego to be in front of somebody. It's more about observing what I see and trying to figure out a way to articulate the ideas of what I'm interpreting from that to them in a way that they understand that they can make a change, right? The interesting thing from a coaching perspective is people, if you tell them something directly, hey, you're doing this mechanically, and I would like you to do that. Very rarely does that stick. You might get a short burst of compliance, for lack of a better term, with that. They may or may not see yield, or more often than not, they won't see yield because it's an extrinsic force that's opposed to what they think they're doing or what they feel is correct, right? So what I try and do a lot is really figure out where that person's coming from and what makes them tick. I, for lack of a better way to put it, I like to crawl up in people's heads by listening, um, observing mannerisms, things like that, and figure out what tool could I use to help them internalize an idea to make them try it. And then at that point, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We move on to the next. But I think what happens a lot in coaching is is people are very much into just saying, "Hey, this is the secret sauce to do that, and if you do this, you will yield this." That's nowhere near foolproof or always the case. So I do a lot of trying to understand where someone is and why they're doing something. Um, and that doesn't necessarily have to be physical, because in my personal opinion, in relation to shooting, 90% of the hurdles that people face are mentally based. The mechanics of shooting are not all that difficult. It's allowing yourself to release to do those mechanical things that seem to trip people up. So trying to figure out what those little hurdles are in something that's not tangible that you can see is what's enjoyable for me. It's like a puzzle, and you're trying to put together the puzzle. Um, but yeah, for me, it's not necessarily mental management, as some people have heard. That's not really what I try and teach. I just try and understand what makes people tick, and then try and figure out how to get them past that. Um, so, kind of my speciality, or what I run into a lot, is hard to deal with students. Someone cannot break through, they'll get passed to me, because I tend to find a way. And it's not that I'm any better than anyone else. I just have a particular knack to try and get in, and get people to kind of think a certain way, I guess.
I could definitely verify that you have a certain knack. Um, so one thing that I see with a lot of shooters, and sometimes I look at it like a spectrum.
Hmm.
It goes from super underconfident to overconfident, and I've been seeing that a lot of shooters that operate in this spectrum, like right in the middle, they end up doing pretty well. So how do you handle like the overconfident and the underconfident?
So the way I kind of think about that is the risk reward kind of quotient, right? You have people that are averse to risk, are people that are overly interested in reward. Um, so, I mean, there's a myriad of ways you could put that. Like Brian talks about, like the accuracy first shooters, the speed first shooters, which is absolutely true. But I really think it's risk reward. So if you get into like the accuracy kind of first shooters, those are people that are averse to risk and averse to changing things to get a different yield. And the people that are on the reward side of the spectrum, the same could apply with a really accurate shooter, because hitting that bullseye gives the dopamine rush and things like that, where they feel like they've accomplished something. And that's those people are averse to kind of failure. And when you find someone that's consistent, where there's not an overabundance of celebration and there's not an overabundance of self-deprecating behavior when they fail, that's when you're kind of released to perform a task. Another thing I try and kind of talk to people about is not really getting caught up in the task defining who you are. The task is a task. It is not representative of who you are as a person. Like how well you do with a gun in your hand doesn't, you're a good person now, all is well in the world. I mean, it can certainly help, right? In certain situations. But it's a task. It's just like anything else. It's doing a math problem. It's putting together a piece of IKEA furniture, however complex or simple that it may be. It's just a task. And once you treat it as such, you can remove the ego from it to an extent. You can never completely separate self. But once you can remove the aversion tactics that our brains create on the failure side or the success side, you can then really subconsciously perform the action. You'll hear a lot about like subconscious shooting and high level competitive shooters, things like that, that you're almost on autopilot to an extent. But I don't know that that's the case. There's just so much noise removed about the past and the future that you're literally watching what's happening in front of you. And all the mechanical processes are just happening because there's no longer cognitive input. It's just kind of happening. You're not having to, well, if this, if that, if this, if that. So really, I think that's what people should learn to do better, is separate themselves from it, where if they do poorly or if they fail on any given thing, especially while learning, that it's a negative connotation, because it's not. It's a requirement to learn things. Failure is inevitable. It will happen. If you try and avoid it, you will never get better. You will stay at a certain level, and that's where you will be. You have to push past that. And the other end of the spectrum is, don't be overly dependent on reward structures, whether they are self-created or externally created, because they're fleeting. The skill that you gain from learning something is yours. Uh, Trinkets or things you win or accolades or recognition for doing those things, it's not real. It's outside, you know. Certainly cool, but it's not going to change who you are as a shooter, I guess.
Hmm. Folks, I want to give a very special thank you to the Top Gun Shooting Range in Memphis, Tennessee. This is where I teach personally. We hold permit classes, introductory courses, and advanced handgun self defense courses. You can also rent guns to shoot on the range, including fully automatic machine guns. Also, in pure Memphis fashion, there's a barbecue restaurant in the building. Top Gun Memphis has 4.9 stars on Google reviews, so if you're in the area, come by and see us. Go to topgunmemphis.com for more info.